Happy Tuesday. We are in the book of James and have been thinking a lot about trials. I ended yesterday with a question asking you to look at your current set of problems and to ask yourself, how many of these do I actually need to own? They're my fault, not someone else's, or how might I live a little bit differently to sort of reshape some of these things. So today we're moving on. James is one of the most Jewish of the letters in the New Testament. As a result, it develops in a repetitive way. Those of us who live in the West, at least those of us who are on the mature side, the distinguished side, I was going to say 40, but I could actually not only say the distinguished side of 50, I could say the distinguished side of 60. Although my wife is still in her, I shouldn't have gone there. So my wife is in her 20s. Anyway, those of us who live in the West and have been around for a while, we're products of the Enlightenment. We tend to think in a very linear way. Paul is Greek. He tends to think in a very linear way. James is more influenced by Jewish thinking, Hebrew parallelism. And so where Paul will take an idea and then sort of just pull this idea apart and pull it apart and pull it apart and pull it apart. And it's this long, he develops these really long arguments, but they tend to be linear. With James, what you get is more like the person who spins plates, right? And gets a plate up and he's spinning one plate, so he's spinning a plate about faith, and then he starts a plate about wisdom, and then he goes back to faith, and then he goes to wisdom, and then he starts a plate about money, and then he goes back to wisdom, and then he starts another plate about something else. And so he's got all these plates, and he keeps going back and forth. And you're like, I mean, if you're from the West, you go, dude, develop your thought. Like, you keep jumping around. And so we're going to see a lot of things where you're like, okay, you talked about this already. It seems like you're repeating yourself. That's a much more Jewish way of developing things. And so what we got here throughout the book is a lot of talk about faith, a lot of talk about wisdom. So wisdom is a big idea. And I've already, in these morning devotions, talked a lot about faith because we've been through books where faith has already come up. No surprise. So wisdom is another big theme. And of course, it's a big theme for Jews because you've got the whole wisdom literature. The Psalms, in particular Proverbs, which is very much about wisdom. The first third is a contrast between the wise and the foolish, and the refrain being the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and all of that. So we just note for the Jews, wisdom is about how you are living. It's not just about being smart. I made this point just this past week as we're in this series about experiencing God, that we're very much talking about what we're applying. The goal is not to know about God. The goal is to know God. And that Hebrew word yadah is the word used to describe Adam knew Eve and she conceived. And so there's much more to than just a head knowledge about knowing and about being wise. So let me end today. Ended yesterday with a question, and that is, which of these trials are your own doing? Let me end with a derivation of that same question, and to say, to suggest two things. One, that you pray for wisdom, because that's what we're told to do in James. Pray for wisdom. But secondly, that you ask the question, who do you know that's wise? Like, not smart, not degrees, not high IQ, not, trivial information, but who do you know that is living a good life? They are being wise. And what might you learn from them? Have a good day.